Welcome back to our channel, Shattered Trust Stories, where we explore the untold stories of relationships, heartbreaks, and the unexpected twists of life. Let's get started. The day my world came crashing down began like any other. I woke up to the sound of my alarm blaring, groggy and tired, but ready to face the day. I had been working overtime for weeks, sacrificing time with my kids and wife to make sure we had enough money to cover the bills and keep our lives on track. My wife, Sarah, had been pressuring me to take on more hours at work, telling me that it was for the good of the family, that our kids needed more, that I needed to work harder to give them the life they deserved. It was the same line every time, and I'd been buying it without question. What I didn't know, though, was that while I was working myself to the bone, she was living a completely different life behind my back. For months, I had suspected that something wasn't right. Sarah had been distant, constantly on her phone, always too busy to spend time with the family. But I brushed it off. Maybe it was just the stress of everything. Maybe I was being paranoid. Then came the day that changed everything. That I was checking our bank account online, just going through the usual bills, when something caught my eye. There was a large, unexplained transaction for $8,000, which, in our situation, was a massive amount of money. At first, I thought it was some sort of mistake, maybe a duplicate charge or an error in the system. But as I scrolled through, I saw the description: luxury handbag purchase. My heart sank into my stomach. That I knew Sarah had been talking about wanting a new purse, but $8,000? That kind of money was far beyond what we could afford, especially with me working overtime just to keep us afloat. I felt the cold grip of betrayal settle over me. I had no idea where she had gotten that kind of money, but I was sure it wasn't from anything legal or honest. My mind started racing. Who else could she be spending this money on? Who had she been with? And why was she lying to me about it? I needed answers, and I needed them fast. But I wasn't about to confront her without knowing the whole truth. That's when I called Jack, my old college friend who had become a private investigator. Jack was brilliant, one of those guys who could dig up anything on anyone, and I knew if anyone could uncover what Sarah had been up to, it was him. Within hours of my call, Jack was already on the case. He didn't ask many questions, knowing that whatever was happening was serious. He just started his work, following Sarah, getting his hands on her social media accounts, and tracking her movements. For the next few days, Jack worked in the shadows, piecing together the clues I couldn't see. It wasn't long before Jack came back with the first piece of damning evidence. Sarah had been sneaking around with someone, a man she'd been seeing behind my back for months. But it wasn't just any man. No, she had been seeing the owner of a local gym, a man I had actually met a few times. His name was Chris, and he seemed like a decent guy when we crossed paths, always talking about fitness and healthy living. But now I saw him in a completely different light. Jack had followed Sarah to the gym, where Chris worked. He had managed to snap a few pictures of them together, Sarah, looking different than the wife I knew, smiling and laughing as she walked out of the gym with Chris. They were too close. The chemistry was undeniable. I felt sick to my stomach. How long had this been going on? How long had she been lying to me, pretending everything was fine when she was already emotionally invested in someone else? But it didn't stop there. Jack's investigation turned up more information. He discovered that Sarah had been visiting Chris's gym several times a week, even though she had always claimed to be too busy with the kids to get to the gym herself. She had been making excuses, telling me she was too tired to go out or too overwhelmed with housework to leave the house, but meanwhile, she was spending hours with Chris. And as for the $8,000 luxury bag? That was Sarah's way of impressing Chris. Jack had uncovered receipts showing that the bag had been bought just days before they went on a romantic getaway to a resort upstate, something she had told me was just a girls' weekend with her friends. As Jack handed me the last piece of the puzzle, I felt a combination of anger, disbelief, and a deep, cold rage that I'd never experienced before. The reality of what Sarah had done, the web of lies she had spun, and the way she had used me as her fool while she carried on her affair, it hit me like a freight train. But I wasn't about to let her get away with this. No, this was the moment I decided to take back control. That I knew exactly what I needed to do. I needed revenge, but not just any revenge, cold, calculated, and painful. I had been humiliated, lied to, and manipulated for far too long, and now, it was time to make her feel the same way. The first part of my plan was simple: expose her. I would show Sarah that I knew everything, that I had seen through her lies, and that her affair wasn't just something she could hide. So, I waited for the perfect moment. It came a week later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Sarah was home, sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, as usual. The kids were at a friend's house for a playdate, and it was the perfect opportunity to confront her. I sat down next to her, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I simply said, "I know everything." Her face turned pale. She looked at me, her eyes widening as she tried to process my words. "What do you mean?" she asked, a feigned innocence in her voice. That I took a deep breath and slid my phone across the table toward her. On it was a folder full of photos Jack had taken, pictures of her with Chris, the receipts for the luxury bag, and even the booking details for the resort weekend. She stared at the screen, her face draining of color. "You had no idea I knew, did you?" I said quietly, my voice steady. "I've known for weeks. And now, I'm done. Done with your lies. Done with your betrayal." She tried to defend herself, but there was nothing she could say. The evidence was overwhelming, and she knew it. The facade she had carefully constructed was falling apart, and for the first time, I saw her panic. She apologized, begging for forgiveness, claiming it was a mistake, that she never meant to hurt me. But I wasn't buying it. "You used me," I said, my voice cold. "You took advantage of my love and trust, and for what? A bag and a weekend with your gym owner? You've made your choice, Sarah. Now you're going to live with it." The confrontation wasn't easy. It hurt, deeply. But as I looked at her, I realized something. I didn't need to get angry. I didn't need to scream. I had won. The truth was out, and I had reclaimed my dignity. The satisfaction came not from getting her back, but from taking back control of my life. Sarah moved out a few weeks later. She tried to play the victim, but I didn't care anymore. I had no interest in her excuses or her guilt. I had learned everything I needed to know. I wasn't going to let her destroy me anymore. As for the kids, they were my priority. The divorce was messy, and I'm sure they were confused, but I knew they needed stability. Jack had helped me with the process, making sure everything was in my favor. My life began to rebuild, slowly at first, but I found peace in the knowledge that I had taken control of my destiny. And though the betrayal had cut deep, it had also shown me that I was stronger than I had ever realized. As for Sarah, she disappeared from my life. I didn't follow her or track her down. The revenge I had planned wasn't about making her suffer, it was about me taking back what was rightfully mine. The weeks after the confrontation were a blur of emotions: grief, relief, anger, and a sense of clarity I had never experienced before. In the days that followed Sarah's departure, I found myself navigating the uncertain waters of life as a single parent. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me, but there was a strange sense of freedom that came with it. I had finally cut the toxic, parasitic relationship from my life. I wasn't shackled to a lie anymore. I wasn't playing the fool, but I wasn't naive enough to think that the pain would just vanish. The wounds Sarah had inflicted on me were deep. She hadn't just betrayed me, she had shattered everything I had believed about our marriage. We had built a life together, or so I thought. We had 2 kids, and I had spent years sacrificing my time, my energy, and my career to give her everything she wanted. The truth, though, was that she had taken everything for granted. I remember the first few nights alone in the house. The silence was deafening. I had gotten so used to the noise, Sarah's voice, the kids running around, the chaos of daily life, that it was unsettling to be in the house with just my thoughts. But amidst the chaos of emotions, one thing became clear: I wasn't going to let this defeat me. I was going to rebuild. For myself. For my kids. For the life that I still deserved. The first step in my recovery was taking control of my environment. I began redecorating the house, getting rid of things that reminded me of Sarah, photographs, old mementos, anything that carried a trace of her presence. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about removing the daily reminders of her betrayal. My kids, especially my youngest, seemed to sense the change, and while they didn't fully understand the situation, they could feel the tension lift when Sarah was no longer there. I also made a vow to myself: I would never allow myself to feel like a victim again. I would not let Sarah's lies define me. I wasn't the man who had blindly worked overtime, sacrificing myself for a family that didn't appreciate me. I wasn't going to let her take my self-worth along with everything else. I had spent so many years trying to live up to her expectations, her constant pressure, her subtle manipulation. I had let her use my love for her to control me. But no more. Now, I was in control of my own life. Jack had been my silent ally throughout all of this. After uncovering Sarah's affair and helping me with the confrontation, he continued to be a trusted friend. He knew exactly what I was going through and never once asked for anything in return. He didn't see this as just a case. He saw it as something more: a man trying to rebuild his life after being broken down by someone he loved. Jack was one of those rare people who genuinely cared, and his loyalty helped me more than I could express. One evening, a few months after Sarah's departure, Jack called me with some unexpected news. "I've been keeping an eye on Sarah," he said, his voice calm but serious. "I think she's up to something. I'm not sure what it is, but I can tell she's planning something." I hadn't heard from Sarah since the divorce was finalized. Her attempts at reconciliation were few and far between, and I had firmly shut her out. But Jack's words sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't sure what she could be planning, but I was certain it wasn't anything good. "I'll look into it," I said, trying to keep my cool. "Let me know if you find anything." Days turned into weeks, and Jack's investigation revealed that Sarah wasn't just wallowing in the consequences of her actions, she was taking steps to manipulate the situation further. It turned out that Sarah had been trying to play the victim, telling people that I had been abusive, controlling, and emotionally unavailable. She was painting herself as the tragic woman who had been trapped in a miserable marriage, forced to turn to another man for comfort. She even told our friends and family that she was seeking therapy to heal from the pain I had supposedly caused her. The audacity of it made me laugh at first, but then it made my blood boil. This wasn't just about her affair anymore. She wasn't just trying to rebuild her own life, she was actively trying to ruin mine. She wanted sympathy from our social circle, wanted to portray me as the villain so she could play the part of the wounded, misunderstood wife. I couldn't let that happen. I knew this was the perfect opportunity for my final act of cold-blooded revenge. It wasn't about petty payback, it was about exposing the truth to everyone who would listen, showing them the real Sarah, the manipulative, deceitful woman she had become. With Jack's help, we began collecting evidence. We had already gathered plenty of proof of her affair with Chris, but now it was time to dig deeper. We reached out to friends and family who had been close to Sarah and me, interviewing them and quietly gathering testimonies of how Sarah had been manipulating people behind the scenes. It wasn't long before we had enough information to confront Sarah again, this time, publicly. I contacted the people Sarah had been telling her lies to and shared with them the full story, leaving out nothing. I wanted everyone to know what she had done, how she had betrayed me, how she had manipulated our entire circle. The day of the confrontation arrived. It was a family gathering, something Sarah had insisted on attending despite everything that had happened. I could see the nervousness in her eyes as she arrived, her usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. She knew something was off, but she didn't know I was about to expose her for everything she was. I waited until everyone had gathered in the living room, drinks in hand, casual conversation filling the air. Then, I stood up, calm but steady, and said, "There's something you all need to know." The room fell silent. I looked around at the faces of our friends and family, each one a piece of my past, each one who had been affected by Sarah's lies. "For the past several months, I've been living a lie," I began. "Sarah's affair wasn't a mistake. It wasn't some slip-up. She chose this. She chose Chris, the gym owner, over me and our family. She lied to every one of you, telling you I was the problem. She told you I was a bad husband, a bad father. But the truth is, she's the one who betrayed all of us." I could feel Sarah's eyes burning into me as I continued. "She's been playing the victim while secretly manipulating everyone around her to get what she wants. And now, I'm not going to let her get away with it. I'm not going to let her destroy my reputation, or our families. You all deserve to know the truth." I pulled out the evidence, photos, receipts, and testimonies, all of it laid out in front of our family and friends. As I spoke, Sarah's face turned red. She tried to interrupt, but I was resolute. This was my moment of reclamation. I wasn't going to let her control the narrative anymore. When I was done, the room was heavy with silence. Sarah's eyes were wide, her expression a mix of fury and humiliation. She tried to defend herself, but no one was listening. The people who had once believed her now saw her for who she truly was, selfish, manipulative, and deceitful. It was the final nail in the coffin of our relationship. From that day forward, Sarah was no longer a part of my life. She had lost the battle for sympathy and control, and I had won, not out of petty vengeance, but by reclaiming my dignity, my reputation, and my future. In the months that followed, my life continued to rebuild. I focused on being the best father I could be. My kids, who had been through so much, finally began to heal, and I made sure they knew I loved them every day. I wasn't going to let their mother's mistakes define their lives. As for Sarah, she faded from the picture. She tried to salvage what was left of her relationships, but the damage was done. She could no longer manipulate the people around her, no longer play the victim. Her world, built on lies and deceit, crumbled around her. As for me, I found peace. I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need to dwell on what Sarah had done. I had taken back control of my life, and I was ready to move forward, stronger and wiser than ever before. The betrayal had changed me, yes, but it had also made me realize that I was capable of so much more than I had ever imagined. I had rebuilt my life from the ashes of betrayal, and this time, nothing and no one would ever take that from me.